సో మా అమ్మ මෙහෙට ඉදි චුට්ටක් වට එහා පැත්තට යනවා.
ගොඩක් සද්ද අඩුවෙන් ඇහෙන්න උතන ඔය මෙර ගහන සද්ද අපිට ඇහෙනවා. මේ කියනවා ඇහෙන්නේ
double-blind reviews. Today marks the culmination of a long, hard road to get here, fraught with hitherto unseen challenges. A very pleasant morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the inaugural sessions of the Peradeniya University International Research Sessions, hosted for the year 2021 by the Faculty of Arts. With a record-breaking number of nearly 850 submissions and nearly 600 papers getting past the double-blind reviews, today marks the culmination of a long, hard road to get here, fraught with hitherto unforeseen challenges. With the world we live in changing, coming to a new paradigm shift with the onset of COVID-19, to organize a conference of this magnitude, broadcasting it to a global audience, transitioning to a blended mode of both on-site and digital, almost seemed like an insurmountable task.
Nevertheless, despite all of these challenges and obstacles, we have come together today to mark the inauguration of yet another successful edition of iPURSE. Headed under the theme of Research and Innovations for an Inclusive Society, a timely socioeconomic aspect given the new world order under COVID, this year's conference will be held in 12 parallel sessions under 8 themes, which are as follows: COVID-19 Issues and Solutions, Education for Transformation, Environment and Natural Resources, Food, Nutrition and Livestock, Health and Society, Language, Culture and Thought, Science, Technology and Industry, and Socioeconomic Progress and Governance.
As per its vision, iPURSE is about bringing together eminent researchers of all disciplines, providing them with a platform for disseminating research findings, exchanging contemporary knowledge, and building partnerships and collaborations to advance scientific research. Hosted for the year 2021 by the oldest of our 9 faculties, the Faculty of Arts, the premier faculty for humanities and social sciences in the country, the nearly 600 papers being presented here, iPURSE is about bringing together novel work from multiple disciplines onto one platform and allowing for that exchange of knowledge and expertise for the development of the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, we warmly welcome the ceremonial procession of guests led by the chief guest, Professor Chandrika N. Vijayaratna, Senior Professor of Medicine and Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, and Professor M.D. Lamavansa, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Peradeniya.
Ladies and gentlemen, we here at Peradeniya, we take our traditions and their enduring beauty quite seriously. And so, to traditionally light the oil lamp and bless the proceedings of the day and tomorrow, we would like to cordially invite the chief guest, Professor Chandrika N. Vijayaratna, Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, Professor M.D. Lamavansa, Vice Chancellor, University of Peradeniya, Professor Terence Madhujit, Deputy Vice Chancellor, University of Peradeniya, Professor O.G. Dayaratnabanda, Chairperson of iPURSE 2021, representing all the directors of the postgraduate institutions, Professor Suresh Demel, Director of the PGIHS, representing all deans, Dr. Prabhat Ekanayaka, Dean, Faculty of Arts, the Acting Registrar, Mrs. Jayantha Dharmasiri, the Bursa, Mr. A.M.N.B. Arampath, the Head Librarian, Mr. R. Maheswaran, and the co-coordinators of iPURSE 2021, Professor Vasanta Korala and Professor Thilak Hevavasam, to join hands with us to light the oil lamp.
Thank you, everyone. Please remain standing for the national anthem.
Sri Lankan Mata, Appa Sri Lankan, Namo, 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 Namo Mata. Sundara Siri Bahini, Surati Ati Shubh Manala.
Please remain standing for the university anthem. Thank you. You may take your seats. The University of Peradeniya is the oldest, largest, and by far the prettiest of all universities in the country, celebrating her 79th year of excellence in 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, do enjoy this visual journey through the university to iPURSE 2021.
I do hope that for some of you that trip down memory lane was wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, we would now like to invite the following dignitaries to the head table. The chief guest, Professor Chandrika N. Vijayaratna, Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo. Professor M.D. Lamavansa, Vice Chancellor of the University of Peradeniya. Professor O.G. Daratna Banda, Chairperson of iPURSE 2021, and the co-coordinators of iPURSE 2021, Professor Tilak Kevavasam and Professor Vasantha Atukorala. I would like to cordially invite the lady and the gentleman to the head table. It is now time for the handing over of the proceedings of iPURSE 2021, and for this, I would like to cordially invite Dr. Madhuranga Kalugampetiya, Editor-in-Chief of iPURSE 2021, Dr. Samanmala Dorabavila, Editor for the Faculty of Arts, Ms. Udana Vijayaratna, Secretary of iPURSE, and Ms. Sewandi Daladavatta to assist.
Thank you. Now we would like to invite the chairperson of iPURSE 2021, Professor O.J. Daratna Banda, to welcome the gathering.
Good morning to all of you. With your permission, I am going to remove the face mask. Venerable Mahasangis, religious dignitaries, Chandrika Vijayaratna, Honorable Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, our chief guest for the iPURSE 2021, Professor Lamavansa, Vice Chancellor of the University of Peradeniya, Professor Vimal Disanayaka, the keynote speaker from University of Hawaii, distinguished guests, invitees, paper presenters, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to each and every one of you for being with us today, physically as well as virtually, to commence the Peradeniya University International Research Sessions 2021, hosted by the Faculty of Arts in the most scenic and the highest ranked university in Sri Lanka. On behalf of the organizing committee of the iPURSE 2021, as the chairperson, It is my honor and privilege to warmly welcome Senior Professor Chandrika Wijeyaratne, Honorable Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, our chief guest, and Professor M.D. Lamavansa, Honorable Vice Chancellor of this university, to the iPURSE 2021. I bid a very warm welcome to Professor Vimal Disanayaka of the University of Hawaii, our keynote speaker, who is joining with us today virtually from Hawaii. I am also pleased to warmly welcome Professor Terence Majudit, Honorable Deputy Vice Chancellor of the University, Deans of Faculties, Directors of Postgraduate Institutes, guests and invitees, all those who are attending virtually to the iPURSE 2021. We are extremely honored and grateful that you have taken out your valuable time and joined us today to be a part of this conference. iPURSE is the flagship research dissemination event of the University of Peradeniya that brings together a large number of scientists and scholars. The iPURSE is expected to create a space for collaborative links between academics and professional practitioners and their workplaces. The iPURSE is providing opportunities for researchers to obtain feedback on their ongoing research from like-minded scholars, for young researchers to be aware of new frontiers of research in their respective fields, for researchers to identify future collaborators and collaborations, and for employers to identify promising young academics for recruitment purposes. I feel proud to say that iPURSE has been organized annually for nearly 40 years and has chronicled huge success each year. In this year, we have invoked the theme, Research and Innovation for an Inclusive Society, considering the central role that innovations play in socioeconomic and institutional progress. Innovation is the introduction of technical and organizational novelty to all aspects of industry and institutions for creating a prosperous and non-discriminatory society that is inclusive and equitable. We are extremely delighted that this year's iPURSE received nearly 850 research submissions. Upon completion of double-blind review, we have accepted close to 600 abstracts for presentation at the conference. It is our fervent expectation that the contribution of these papers to scientific advancement would be immensely beneficial to the researchers for future studies and to the policymakers in redesigning policies for making the humanity better. Even though this conference is the marker of the success of our institution, it also allows us to meet some of the brilliant minds in diverse fields. To wind up my welcome speech, let me pay my gratitude to all those who work tirelessly to make the iPURSE 2021 amidst the challenging situations of the COVID-19 pandemic and the technological necessities required to offer the iPURSE 2021 virtually. I guarantee all of you that the iPURSE 2021 will be productive and worth your precious time. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of a higher education institution, especially a university, is to foster an academic environment in which research and innovations can flourish. It is on this environment and its academic community, our academic community, that the entire nation depends on for both development and survival. Without research, we will not rise to the heights of our potential, and that is why ventures such as iPURSE are vital to developing nations such as ours. And so, ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to turn your attention to the screen so that you can see the heights of research at the University of Peradeniya.
research in the kinds of fields that we work in is not merely a slight tweaking of a machine or introduction of a new method, coming up with a new process of doing something. It's actually generating maybe knowledge, probably generating attitudes, probably generating a way of thinking that actually creates different human beings.
Management is very generic phenomenon which can be applied any type of human behavior.
We study animal health, human health and the environmental health together as a one concept. It is globally known as One Health concept.
You cannot do overnight solution for agriculture sector. You have to have a short term, medium term and long term planning.
Medicine is an art. You need to identify the patient's behavior, the patient's pain, the patient's necessity.
Science is the process that discerns facts from fiction. At the Faculty of Science, we do basic research on basic sciences as well as applied sciences.
Our faculty, as the only dental faculty that is present in Sri Lanka, has made substantial contribution to the dental education, as well as has made a broad contribution to uplift the research activities.
Our research is very much in the core of developing the country as well as serving the world to be a better place.
Evidence shows that only the high impact, properly designed studies could only end up in changing the policy. So therefore our researchers are highly scientific and followed the rigorous methods.
Research at the Faculty of Arts encompasses a wide range of disciplines related to the humanities and social sciences.
The kind of interdisciplinary research we do includes energy-related research, the research related to various control systems and also nanotechnology, biomedical engineering.
Faculty of Dental Sciences covers laboratory, clinical and community-based research dealing with pathological entities, dental anthropology, as well as identification of Sri Lankan norms for orofacial structure.
If I just go to the biomedical researchers that they do about the human physiology, about nutrition and the basic sciences involved researchers. And when I come to the clinical research, again they do about chronic kidney diseases and the diseases related to pregnancy and snake envenomations.
Research activities in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and Animal Science encompass a wide range of interest, which include nutraceuticals, cancer therapeutics, veterinary zoonotic diseases, antimicrobial resistance, testing mycotoxins, veterinary drugs and foodborne pathogens in food and feed.
We have been involved in post-COVID-19 rehabilitation studies and also a range of studies in nursing practices and quality use of medicine and antimicrobial stewardship program. And also we are involved in drug discovery and development.
Our main focus is on the sustainable productivity improvements of crops and farm animals, soil science related problem solving, genetic improvements, biotechnology, food science and technology, precision agriculture, climate change, adaptation.
The fields include life sciences, molecular biology and biochemistry, environmental sciences, physics, chemistry, mathematics, ICT, statistics and industrial science.
Research topics mainly range from accounting, corporate reporting, marketing and society, operations management, managing human resources and organizational practices.
Recently finished project was Asia, funded by NORAD, where we managed to develop water resource management expertise within the faculty. We are developing a wave energy harnessing device called Pendula, which has a conversion efficiency of 30 to 40%.
And we conduct workshops and training programs for our stakeholders, and we have received some patents as well, and currently in the process of commercializing a COVID test kit.
Our researchers publish extensively in high impact journals, and which resulted in a number of policy changes, ultimately reduction in deaths from a number of communicable and non-communicable diseases.
Research related to smokeless tobacco cessation programs conducted by the Center for Research in Oral Cancer had led to development of national guidelines and policies aiming to reduce the oral cancer prevalence.
Management improvements, new product development, and also innovative technologies. So these are going to be directly benefited to the stakeholders.
We are so proud that our researchers have brought the global and national as well as the international impact on our projects.
The impact of management research also contributed to introduce the new management practices such as social marketing, social entrepreneurship, green reporting.
Faculty of Science have most eminent researchers as well as most active scientists on basic sciences, and we disseminate knowledge using journals such as the Ceylon Journal of Sciences, which is a publication of the University of Peradeniya.
The Faculty of Arts has a long history of influential research in the social sciences and humanities fields. Research gets published in high impact, high visibility academic journals. Research has a wider reach through dissemination and creative work, and a greater impact through the involvement of staff at policy levels.
Clinical research conducted on dental trauma, eruption times, dental caries, and periodontal disease has led to modification of treatment guidelines.
We develop biodegradable materials for packaging, and also various the value addition to, such as for dolomite and so on.
If I take the chronic kidney diseases, that again has brought a lot of local policy involvements with the results of our research.
Our research and creative work have received recognition and credibility at both national and international levels.
We do core research with industries. For example, we work with Codgen, we work with LTL Holdings Limited, we work with Grow White, and various local industries as well as multinational foreign industries.
Ours is the only faculty do research and diagnosis of diseases in diverse animal groups, and then we provide services.
Improving solar panels using advanced material technology, mitigating road traffic using artificial intelligence, fighting back against COVID-19 using nanotechnology, and helping to fight dengue fever using Wolbachia mediation process.
All researches which are conducted by our faculty is in line with national research priorities, which ultimately will help in establishing an economic benefit to the country.
Last 5 years we earn around 600 million research money, and also we produce around 100 high-end peer-reviewed journal papers.
We are shouldering a global need for this work.
Outcomes are going to be directly collaborative type with the stakeholders.
All in all, the management research is very, very important nowadays. That help the organization to efficiently use the resources.
Research in the humanities and social sciences has the potential to create fundamental changes in the society and the world we live in. Research in these disciplines can provide keys to a richer and fuller understanding of the past, create a more wholesome present, and help shape a more inclusive and sustainable future for the next generation.
We hope you enjoyed the video, and we believe it gave you a sense of achievement and a sense of responsibility towards fulfilling further commitments in your journey of research. Now, it is indeed my pleasure to invite the Vice-Chancellor, University of Peradeniya, Professor M.D. Lamavansa, to address this gathering.
the most venerable sirs who are joining online, Senior Professor Chandrika Wijeratna, Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, and the chief guest this morning, Professor Vimal Disanayaka, the keynote speaker, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Terence Madhujit, Professor O.G. Dayaratna Banda, the chairperson of the research sessions, Dean of the Faculty of Arts, the hosting faculty, Dr. Prabhat Ekanayaka, other deans, directors of PG institutes, co-coordinators, Professor Tilak Hewasam and Vasantha Atukorala, acting registrar, the Bursa, colleagues, friends and researchers. Madam, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And you, as a senior colleague of mine, was the one who co-authored my first abstract when I was an intern medical officer in National Hospital, Colombo. And since then, because you were a postgraduate registrar at that time, I was just an intern. And we have been working together in many spheres. And also, your husband, who is a professor of surgery in Colombo, who is the head surgery, has remained a good friend to me. But those are not the reasons why you have been invited as the chief guest this morning. I am delighted with the efforts, untiring efforts of my staff, headed by Professor O.G. Dayaratna Banda, and the exceptional contribution of the Faculty of Arts and its named Dean, Dr. Ekanayaka, and also the organizing committee, and some of the members are here, for successfully organizing this event amidst challenges faced by us. There would have been a vacuum in the history of the University of Peradeniya, as Prof. O.G. mentioned, if the university had not conducted this signature annual conference. Central administration did not have to do anything, and the Faculty of Arts and the coordinators and the organizing committee did everything. I only knew that there was something like this taking place, and I was invited to coordinate with the chief guest. That was all. The conference theme fits well with the current issues faced by our people and the ethos and the broad spectrum of disciplines that the University of Peradeniya has established and cultivated over the years, as you saw a little earlier. At this occasion, let me share with you some problems that we are trying to address as the university to improve the university research culture, and some questions that we need to find answers to. Although the prevailing research culture needs substantial improvement in certain faculties and departments, they all have few progressive and innovative researchers, very high-end researchers. However, some of those academics work in close, compartmentalized environment with little or no interaction within and outside the faculty or the university. Therefore, it is essential to promote a cultural shift to create more interaction and collaboration at the faculty level, leading to interfaculty and interdisciplinary research, with particular reference to the alliance between natural and social sciences. You heard that from many of the researchers who were contributed to the video. To stimulate and complement such initiatives of my staff to promote interdisciplinary research, more specifically the studies and training courses could be updated using multidisciplinary inputs to enhance faculty resource sharing and cross-disciplinary teaching if the university is very serious about interdisciplinary research to last long decades to come. Identifying new multidisciplinary research areas in the local regional context, but having national and international implications, will strengthen our ties with the community and directly impact their livelihoods and well-being. Multidisciplinary research at the university could address the issues, some of them, related to human development, aging, disasters, crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, and I heard that there are more than 30 odd number of abstracts being presented, sustainable development, agriculture, and industry collaboration in rural development, a few areas to concentrate on. In addition, our experience of coordinating multi-faculty interdisciplinary projects such as One Health project as you saw earlier, and CKDU, will be an advantage in spearheading the required transformation towards multidisciplinary approach to research. To further the multidisciplinary research culture, determined efforts are needed to address interfaculty barriers, the scarcity of facilities, and the necessary workforce to undertake interdisciplinary research. I'm very happy the Council and the Senate and my deans, the VC's advisory, are addressing some of these issues currently. Central and faculty level research administration entities, large number of them, needs to examine the impediments such as resource limitations, institutional bureaucracies, institutional rigidities in fund disbursements, lack of administrative support to researchers, and so many other things, and devise ways to ease such constraints. Because of the rigidities we have in the system, I know that some researchers take their funds outside for easy management, which is in my mind a crime. Further, there should be more attention to address individual staff requirements such as improving general research skills, proposal formulation skills, and dedicated time for research. Seeking funding through industry and foreign collaboration, the assistance of successful recipients of large research grants, some of them came on board, and alumni would also need to be solicited in our efforts. I don't think we have tapped our alumni research potentials and the potentials to assist us in this endeavor. Many research students and young researchers attend this conference, though online. Therefore, it is appropriate for me to raise a few things relevant to them as well. One of the questions that has been asked is as to how much assistance we, the university, offer to them, these budding researchers. For example, does a probationary lecturer get adequate mentoring or seed funding to start a project? This is what we discussed a couple of days ago at the CVCD, to which my senior colleague, Professor Vijayaratna, actually helped me to take the matter up. Do they receive, these youngsters, multidisciplinary input to embark on interdisciplinary research? How much dedicated time do young researchers have to engage in research, especially when they have to engage in multitude of tasks, including administrative work, rather prematurely, even as heads of departments? I have seen in front of my eyes some of the quite capable people not improving to their potential because of the administrative and the other burdens imposed on them at an early stage. Turning to our institutional KPIs, do we have any research targets identified, either as individuals or collectively? Or do we have targets outcomes for the centers and units established to facilitate, promote, and carry out research? It was last week, one of the candidates who came for professor promotion actually had a target, and also she has a target on annual basis as to what to achieve. That is one example. Another young researcher who published about 6 articles in high-impact journals wants to maintain his KPI is 6 journal articles a year. So there are some academics who have identified targets for them, and can we infest these kind of attitudes among the others. Further, to promote university's research culture, do we maximally utilize the establishments linked to our university, such as PG institutes? More can be done in this regard. Another very important question is on the adequacy of number of research students we have. In our university system, of the about 880 academics currently working, about 62% are PhD holders, 550. We have around, in addition, about 8,000 MPhil and MSc. Some of them pursue research and others do not. But, however, only we have 280 PhD students registered with us. Is this 280 enough for us? I don't think so. If it is so, then the university needs to take appropriate steps to enroll more research students. In our attempts to increase the number of PG students, the institution has to carefully examine our expectations from research students, cultivation of attributes required to become a good research student, facilitation of research process, inputs, processes, and outcomes, problems related to supervision, addressing the grievances of research students, and basic facilities provided to them, and so on. Dear young PG students and their lecturers, the attributes of a good researcher include honesty, integrity, professionalism, independent thinking, and inquisitiveness, and mindfulness. Mindfulness is a psychological process of purposely bringing one's attention to experiences occurring in the present moment without judgment. If accomplished, mindfulness in its proper form is an excellent spin-off of your research project. Other qualities of a good research student include attention to detail, a desire to be unique, the ability to think outside the box, sometimes lacking, the ability to present information succinctly, and proper language skills, and non-technical skills we often talk about these days: punctuality, time management, teamwork, presentation abilities, and so on. Turning to undergraduates, and some faculties have established good undergraduate research programs. I had the occasion to attend at least 2 such sessions recently. However, once they leave us as graduates, having well trained in research, do we support them to expand on their research interests, which will benefit our institutions too? After all, they are our research alumni. I believe working with them even after they have moved onto non-academic jobs in whatever the sectors chosen by them could pay off handsomely for our investments as undergraduates. The last point I would like to highlight is the low percentage of conversion of our research work to publications and innovations. The University of Peradeniya undertakes a large number of undergraduate and postgraduate research projects. Nearly about 600 such presentations are being made today and tomorrow. However, following up on the outcomes and persevering with them to convert to meaningful publications and innovations is much desired. I believe we as an institution take policy decision to embed these two aspects, the publications and innovations, in the research proposals and projects at the very outset. Department of Surgery recently had 2 visiting students. They spent about 6 months conducting research, undergraduates, they are from Singapore. They had identified even the journal, the British Journal of Surgery, which is a highly reputed journal, to publish their research work. Even at the time they wrote the research proposal, they succeeded. To achieve some of those ideals, the institution's responsibility is to provide adequate administrative and scientific support, including in scientific writing, which needs to be addressed by the University Research Council. Outcome of the nature that is expected, such as publishing your research work, will need additional funding in some cases. In this regard, please be assured, on behalf of the BURSA and the deans and the directors, our support to publish your data presented at iPURSE 2021 in a large scale. I state this knowing very well, not all, nearly 600 presentations will be upgraded to journal articles. Financial support for 600 articles is a mammoth task. However, even if all of you decide to convert your presentations and research to papers, central administration will make every effort to stick to its word made today in front of you. Finally, Madam and ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a fruitful conference and thank you for inviting me and also listening to the broad views that I have on developing research culture in our university. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor Lamavansu. Your words were both hard-hitting and irrefutable in their truth, but they were also encouraging, maybe for a better, hopeful research culture here at Peradeniya. It is with that I move on to my next task, with great pleasure that I move on to my next task, and I apologize beforehand to our esteemed chief guest if I make a mess of some of the medical terms that I'm about to say, because my next task is to introduce our chief guest to the audience. Professor Chandrika N. Vijayaratne is an alumnus and an academic in reproductive medicine and endocrinology in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology in the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo, since 1993. She is a senior professor since 2010, having qualified with an MBBS honours, an MD in internal medicine, and a Doctor of Medicine by research in 2003. In addition to being a Commonwealth Fellow, she was elected as a Fellow of the Ceylon College of Physicians and the Royal College of Physicians of London, and was awarded an honorary fellowship by the Sri Lanka College of Endocrinologists, another by the College of General Practitioners of Sri Lanka, and the Association of Physicians of India. She is a globally recognized, highly cited researcher who has served on many scientific working committees and affiliated organizations. As an invited expert, including the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of London, the International Consensus Groups on Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome by the European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology, and the Androgen Nexus PCO Society of the United States, and more recently, an expert group led by the University of Monash of Australia. She has delivered numerous orations and keynote lectures at prestigious institutions around the world. She has received global recognition as an invited speaker and a resource person on many facets of women's health and related issues in many developed and developing nations. It is with that I very cordially invite our chief guest for the day, Professor Chandrika N. Vijayaratne, Vice Chancellor, University of Colombo, to address the gathering.
Thank you, Ibo1, Venerable Sirs, and all those of the clergy, as well as those who are joining in online, including our keynote speaker for today, Vice Chancellor of the University of Peradeniya. Thank you very much for your kind words, as well as reminding me of those days way back when you were a graduate of Ruhuna and was working in Colombo and was moving up your career path. And no doubt, research was a very difficult task then, back in the 1980s, I believe, where we thought it was something unattainable. Our chairperson, respected chairperson, and the entire organizing committee of the research iPURSE 2021 of the University of Peradeniya, Deputy Vice Chancellor, all the deans, all the directors, heads of departments, particularly the postgraduate and undergraduate researchers and their supervisors, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank you for inviting me. It brings back memories of when you drive, of course it was in the heavy rain, of all those beautiful places, right up to Kandy, and of course your beautiful garden, university. And in fact, yesterday was the Call to Earth Day, and we from the University of Colombo were trying our level best to make our documentary for CNN as we were invited. And that was in view of our going for the rankings of the green concept. And I wish you all would also follow suit, since you all have so much more to talk about than us in the metropolitan city. At the outset, I would also like to congratulate you on bringing in a very important theme with such a deep meaning. Such a deep meaning for the 21st century's third decade, where we are probably having had to face and will face some of the most challenging times of humankind in the more recent times. And I congratulate you for your thematic areas of work, and also on your multinational research programs, which are so well depicted, particularly on the One Health concept. But I would like to implore and add to what our Vice Chancellor's rhetoric is the addressing of the Sustainable Development Goals, because now the SDGs, I believe, are so much more, even more important than what they were in the more, when we were planning for it and discussing it. And we from universities have to take this lead as responsible citizens. So from the aspect of research, as you mentioned, research is creation of knowledge. Research is basically going and actually respecting the truth, as our Vice Chancellor mentioned. And in that aspect, most disadvantageously, our educational system, particularly for the inputs to our university, have been molded towards knowledge transfer rather than knowledge creation. And therefore, we need to do something about it. And I'm very impressed that you all are addressing education transformation. And I really would wish that policymakers and implementers and planners of our country will think ahead for the next 50 years and actually make our pioneers like Ivo Jennings so happy that we could achieve that, the true sense of the meaning of the word education. From a holistic angle, as well as a multidisciplinary angle, breaking all barriers, building bridges, and also working as teams and not in silos. So in that context, the culture of research, which I may propose, Vice Chancellor and all the deans, is that when we have our new entrants, we do these orientation courses and we address lots of aspects. I mean, it's very challenging to our kids as much as their mentors, but we need to address research by probably exposing them to something that has made an impact on humankind. And I well remember Professor Varagunam, who was one of my mentors simply because we did a national research program on human reproduction for the entire country. When he was in WHO, he used to say that we need to identify the simple basic things that made such a difference to humankind. And in fact, when at the turn of the millennium, the BMJ, the British Medical Journal, held a questionnaire, a wide international questionnaire, the greatest impact that was made into medical and health research was water and sanitation. Not medications, not pharmacology, not devices, not industry, but simple water and sanitation. And I'm sure COVID-19 has reminded us that we need to have our feet on the ground while we venture out into research. In those terms, Vice Chancellor mentioned about technology transfer and commercialization. We have to be realistic. We cannot expect every researcher to get to that point. It might be only 1 or 2% of these entire 600 or 800 researchers who had the time and the commitment to make their submissions. But we need to encourage those who can to go there, and in fact, the beautiful mask, which I have met your researcher and his team, I truly salute them for having brought that on, and also the fact that it won't add to the waste, the solid waste disposal, which is something we need to be conscious of. As I'm sure we will be waiting to hear our keynote speaker today, media is another aspect that we need to address as university researchers. Because the COVID-19, me being a medic, I realized, we needed to bring about a behavioral change without panic. But what happened with the infodemic, it was much the reverse. In as much as even about university research, I think we need to bind with the media and take that field further forward to show the true meaning and the true meaning of science. So in terms of administration, in terms of research management, I know we all face challenges. We have the auditors on the one hand. We have the multiple problems of signing MOUs and MTAs, material transfer agreements. But I would really like to appreciate all the work that has been done in terms of international collaboration. Internationalization is extremely important, but we need to maintain our Sri Lankan identity, as well as garner indigenous practices and knowledge, which is extremely important. We have the Ayurveda Center, the Institute for Ayurveda and Unani, and we know that their knowledge and practices probably date back to many thousands of years as opposed to the Western medicine. But most unfortunately, because of societal outlook, they are trying to medicalize and become like Western medics, which is very unfortunate. And we as Western medics should try to encourage them to look into the science but retain that identity of indigenous practices. So therefore, I think that we within our universities of Sri Lanka can link up so much better and give a much better output than functioning again in silos as universities. So I would also like to propose inter-university collaboration as much as possible. No doubt, respecting our areas of copyright and intellectual properties, but to maintain that link would add so much value. In as much as dissemination, this is the basic dissemination, such fora, but the library also is a repository of many of our theses and all our journals, high impact factor, as well as the locally grown and developed and nurtured journals which are of great repute, but which may have not got indexed. So in the CBCD, as Vice Chancellor mentioned, we are discussing also about research in terms of research publications, which are we don't like the word white list, but we mentioned it as the recommended list, which will have to be reviewed every year or very regularly, but we need to respect that, and also to conduct similarity checks and have plagiarism bandings for the based on the contextual needs of the different areas of study. So these are some of my suggestions for your thoughts and future discussion. And I would like to end by wishing you all the very best. I know networking, even on the virtual mode, is more challenging than meeting physically. Networking virtually, again, does not bind us, particularly to develop those important research groups, which I'm sure we can do in better times, not further ahead. But my plea is to think globally, act locally, and maintain the Sri Lankan identity and the South Asian identity to be a useful and impactful research with a meaning for the betterment of our society. So all the very best. Thank you for inviting me. And before I wind up, I would like to make this hand over this memento to the Vice Chancellor, because we just celebrated 100 years of arts and humanities and the library in Colombo. And we know that Peradeniya is our greatest ally. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Wijeratne, for your presence here with us today and your words of encouragement. Now I would like to invite the Vice Chancellor, University of Peradeniya, Professor M.D. Lamavansa, to present the token of appreciation to our chief guest, Professor Chandrikayan Wijeratne. Now it's time to turn to the centerpiece of today's inauguration, what all of us have been waiting for, the keynote address. May I hand over the floor to Professor Liyanage Amarakirti, Professor of Sinhala, University of Peradeniya, to introduce our keynote speaker for the day.
Reverences, ladies and gentlemen. It is with a great sense of respect and responsibility that I introduce our keynote speaker today. Professor Vimal Disanayake earned his BA in Sinhala from the University of Ceylon at Peradeniya, his MA from University of Pennsylvania, and the PhD from Cambridge. From the beginning of his career, Professor Disanayake attempted to bridge the gap between literary and intellectual worlds of Sinhala and English, national and international, a gap that had widened since 1970s. He started that intellectual bridge-making by writing a book of essays while he was still an undergraduate. The book was Sanatana Aragalaya, or The Constant Struggle. From then on, Professor Disanayake constantly engaged himself in that struggle and published essays and books in literary criticism and theory, introducing several new concepts to Sinhala readers. He made radical and demanding theories appealing, simple, even rather docile. After leaving the University of Peradeniya in 1979, Professor Disanayake lived primarily in the US, holding various appointments there and in Hong Kong. During the 1980s, Professor Disanayaka's research mostly focused on communication theory and cinema, resulting in numerous essays and edited volumes. For the general public, Vimal Disanayaka is a beloved poet. He has 10 collections and 1 narrative poems to his credit. More often than not, his moving poems show that he never really left Sri Lanka and his alma mater. Professor Disanayaka, with a great deal of respect, I welcome you back to Peradeniya and invite you to deliver your speech. Thank you.
Sir, now your screen will be shared. Okay, 10 seconds, right? No, after I say, then 10 seconds. Oh, okay. Yeah, sir, now you may begin your speech, sir, after 10 seconds.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I want to thank all of you who decided to attend this very important and significant intellectual event. Before I begin, I would like to tender an apology. I was hoping to attend and deliver this lecture in person, as were the planners of this conference. But unfortunately, the brutalities and the improbabilities of the coronavirus are such that it was not possible. So therefore, we had to select the second best option, which was to do it through Zoom. I have to also thank Professor Tilak Hewavasan, with whom I had extensive email exchange leading up to this event. He, like my brother, is an eminent geologist. I also should thank Dr. Sudesh Mahantilaka, who helped me with the technical aspects of this presentation. The title of my presentation this morning is The Complex Interplay, the Writer, the Text, the Reader, and the Context. Now, it is not a simple interaction, but a complex interplay that I am referring to. So in other words, I have selected 4 of the most important building blocks of creativity and literature. That's the writer, the text, the reader, and the context. And I have tried to, or I will try to explore in depth the implications of their interactions so that we can have a better understanding of the experience of literature and literary communication. So the ultimate aim is to deepen the understanding of the literary experience, which we all value. Now, I have a fundamental challenge here in this morning's presentation, and that is there are 2 groups that I am addressing. On the one hand, there are those scholars who have specialized in variety of disciplines other than literature. It may be history, geography, linguistics, psychology, sociology, chemistry, and so on. But they are interested in literature, but they are not specialists in literary theory. So that's one group. On the other hand, there's a smaller group who have specialized in literary theory and literature and so on, and who would expect from me some newer pathways of inquiry into this topic. So I have to balance these 2 contending forces. If I make it too technical and too jargon-ridden, it will turn off the group members of the first group. But if I make it too simple, then it will turn off the members of the second group. So I would avoid both extremes and to try and navigate the middle passage. I think that's important. Another point that I want to make is I studied Sinhala, English and Sanskrit at the university To the best of my knowledge, no one had done that combination before. And ever since, I have pursued these areas of study very rigorously. So this morning's talk, I will be drawing on these three main streams: Sinhala literature, English literature, and Sanskrit literature. In my analysis, they are interconnected in very interesting ways. Now the question is, why did I select this topic? The complex interplay, writer, text, reader, and context. There are a number of reasons for that. The first is, we all read literature. We read works of literature in our spare time for entertainment. We may be specializing in geology or linguistics, but we read literature and it's a part of our life. But we don't stop to think about the nature of literature. What is literariness? What are the ingredients involved? How do literary scholars think about their chosen field? And so on. So it's a way of expanding the horizons by talking about literariness, the elements of literature that I propose to do through my talk this morning. But if, rather than discuss this topic in a highly abstract way, I chose 4 important building blocks: the writer, the text, the reader, and the context. And through their interplay, very contextual interplay, I will try to point out the implications of their interplay to the understanding of literature. So the first then is, we all read literature, therefore it's, in a sense, we are interested in understanding what literary discourse is about. So it's a way of gaining entrance into the modern literary discourse. That's one. On the other hand, for those specialists in this field, they are interested in models of literary analysis, concepts of literary analysis. So I would like to inquire into that domain and propose some new ideas, open new pathways of inquiry that might stimulate their interest. So I'm trying to please both groups, but it's a challenging task and there's no guarantee of success. Another thing that I want to achieve in this talk is to de-hegemonize Western theory. As you will see in my talk, I draw very heavily on Western theory, especially French theory. But at the same time, it's very important for us not to be overwhelmed, overburdened by Western theory. We should certainly draw on them. Some excellent work has been done by Western theorists, and we should draw on them. But at the same time, we should exercise our critical faculty and then try to draw out some of the weaknesses, blind spots in their attempts, and try to avoid them in our own work. So in that sense, to de-hegemonize is not to overthrow, not to eliminate, but it is to creatively engage with a view to avoid domination. So it's a difficult task, but I'll keep that in mind as I proceed. So de-hegemonizing Western theory is an object of my presentation today. But I will do that not using the jargon so that those who are not specialists in literature will have no problem. So I'll do it in orderly speech. Another point that I wish to make is, as I said, I was influenced by Sanskrit and Sinhala literature in my early days, and I continued that interest. And Sanskrit literature, especially the aesthetics, has much to offer to us. So as a kind of countervailing force to Western theory, I would like to advance forward Sanskrit theory. Now, I would like to quote a stanza from Mamata's Kavya Prakasha in the 11th century. Kavyam yashirta krute vivahara videshi veta rakshate sadhya paranirvute kanta samitataya upadesha vijay. Now, this is a wonderful stanza. It points out 6 important functions of poetry: yashasha, fame; arthakruta, gaining wealth; vivahara vide, understanding society; shiveta rakshate, avoiding evil; 5, sadhya paranirvute, gaining supreme pleasure; and 6, advice, as for instance, a wife would give a husband. So giving advice becomes important. So you see, the function of poetry is being examined both from the poet's and the receiver's viewpoint. The poem is seen both as a material object as well as a symbolic object. So in the 11th century, aesthetician has this very fine observation to make, which now 20th century literary scholars in the West are promoting. So therefore, it's always good to have this interaction between the Western concept and the Eastern concept. Now, the theme of my topic, as I said, was the interaction between the writer, the text, the reader, and the context. Now, it is important to bear in mind the fact that although these four entities are independent and sovereign in a sense, but they are also highly interdependent. They depend on each other for sustenance and life. So therefore, the interaction is far more important than their individual entities. The interaction is important. In fact, in my talk, I want to emphasize the interstitial space, the interaction that is taking place between the writer and the text, or the text and the writer, is extremely important. And that is where we can build theories. That's where the exciting part is. So therefore, to do that, rather than think of a writer as a solitary soul, individual, we should think in terms of networks of writers. Let's take Shakespeare, probably the greatest writer who ever lived. But you cannot understand Shakespeare without paying attention to his predecessors, the codes and the conventions that they propagated. So therefore, it's very important to think in terms of networks of writers, or networks of text, or networks of readers. So rather than thinking in terms of solitary entities, we have to think in terms of network. That becomes important. And it also, I said, there's a connection between the writer, the text, the reader, and the context, one leading to the other. Historically speaking, something very interesting happened. So I'm speaking of the 20th and the 21st centuries. What happened was, in the first stage, the focus of interest was on the writer. The writer was of paramount importance. But in the second stage, the writer gave way to the text. The text began to assume a greater importance, and the writer began to fade away. That's the second stage. And the third stage, the reader assumed a prominence position, and the text began to be displaced, and the writer enjoyed the privileged position. And in the fourth stage, the context, which had so far been totally neglected, attracted attention. So this I will explain, and its implications for the understanding of literature. So the transition is not a simple one. It is not a linear movement. It is actually a transactional movement, each responding to the other and making the suitable movements. So therefore, it is a transactional movement, and it is marked by tension, points of tension, and these are of great interest to literary scholars. Okay, now then let's take the four entities. First, I want to take the writer, whom I said was the one who first attracted attention, the writer. In medieval times, the writer was not important at all. In fact, texts were anonymous. If you take, say, folk poetry in most countries, they are anonymous communal creations. We don't know who the authors are. The writer remained in the background. That's what happened in the medieval period. But however, with the progress of time, around the 17th century, the concept of the individual began to emerge, and as a result, the writer began to assume a position of importance. The writer began to be regarded as someone of value and significance. So writer is now in the forefront. This, of course, changed the situation of literature because individualism became very important. Ian Watt, for instance, has pointed out in his book, The Rise of the Novel, a remarkable study, that the individual, rise of the individual and the rise of the novel are inextricably linked. So the concept of individuality and the writer are very important in the early stages of modern literary theory. And we have what is called liberal humanism that was in the early part of the 20th century. And early liberal humanism sort of emphasizes the individual. Humanism emphasizes the individual, and therefore the writer becomes important. Now, because of this emphasis on the writer, number of literary modes of literary analysis emerged. One is biographical criticism. You judge the work in terms of the writer. You gather as much information about the writer as possible and try to connect them, make important links with the writer. To give an example, Poe's work, Edgar Allan Poe's work, has been examined in terms of his biography. The critics isolate certain incidents from his works of fiction and then point out how those incidents are directly drawn from his own biography. So that becomes an important part, the biographical criticism. Similarly, the psychoanalytic criticism becomes important, especially under the guidance of Freud. Critics began to draw on Freudians of various concepts, superego, ego, and so on. And they began to fashion criticism that was psychoanalytical in nature. Just to give an example, Kafka is one of the world's greatest writers, short story writers, and novelists. He wrote a number of allegories of great significance. For instance, in his short story, The Metamorphosis, he points out the plight of a character who suddenly one morning realizes that he has turned into an insect, right? It's a sort of fantasy. But critics have examined this story in terms of Freudianism because Kafka was dominated by his father. He was afraid of his father. In letters to his father, that becomes very apparent. So that Freudian concepts were used to show that Kafka feared his father, he was dominated by his father. So that finds expression in his creative work. So you see how biological criticism is applied to literature. So similarly, there's phenomenological criticism. Phenomenology is a branch of philosophy. It emerged in the 20th century. The originator is a German called Edmund Husserl. And later, people like Martin Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty and Jean-Paul Sartre and others propagate this. But it's a philosophy, it's a way of looking at the world that focuses attention on the idea of consciousness. Consciousness is supremely important to phenomenologists. Now, a lot of literary critics began to draw on phenomenology, especially the so-called Geneva School. They began to draw on this and thereby focus on the consciousness of the writer, how it finds expression in poetry or fiction or drama. That becomes a very important element. So therefore, biographical criticism, psychoanalytic criticism, and phenomenology gave a kind of encouragement to the writer as supreme. Right? So they were assisting critics who were promoting the writer as the originator of meaning and judgment. But things began to change when different types of modes of analysis emerged on the Western literary scene. With the emergence of new criticism in the 30s, 40s, 50s, what happened was the writer began to wane in influence and the text began to emerge as supremely important. After all, the new critics were focusing on words on the page. That's what matters, not the experience of the writer, his vision, his values, his attitude to life were of minimal significance. They focused attention on the words chosen by the writer, the texture, the writing was what matters. So the text was what matters. And this trend of thinking was propagated both in the UK and the USA. Critics like I.A. Richards and F.R. Lewis in England, who were associated with new criticism and practical criticism, and critics like John Crowe Ransom and Clint Brooks in the United States, who were associated with new criticism, helped to establish the supremacy of the text. And that becomes a very important movement. So, apart from new criticism, There was Russian formalism, again, this roughly the same time, who wanted to create a science of literature by studying literariness, and they focused once again on the text. It's the text and the technique that matter to them, not the vision of the writer. So that becomes quite important. Apart from this, the whole post-structuralist movement had a way of undermining the significance of the author, the writer. Roland Barthes, who is closely associated with post-structuralism, once said that the author is dead. By this, he didn't mean that the author there's no more author. What he meant was that the importance of the author has dwindled. It is lessened, it's minimal now. And what has happened is, as the significance of the author has dwindled, the power of the reader has emerged. So there's a kind of interesting movement there, decline of the author and the rise of the reader. So that becomes very important. And also, certain writers also created a situation whereby the writers were in fact undermined. And in a sense, the works of Calvino, Gunter Grass, Garcia Marquez, and so on, with their superb narrative skills, had a kind of way of undermining the supremacy of the writer that was in vogue, say, 50 years ago. So that's again an interesting aspect. So generally what happened was, during the time when the writer was supreme, personhood mattered. But during the time when the text became important, it was the subjectivity of the person that mattered. So subjectivity is a creation of language, it's a creation of culture, it's a creation of philosophy, it's a creation of so many other things. So that it's not self-present, sovereign, unified, but it depends on so many other factors. Although there was a decline in the writer, certain modern writers have tried to rescue the situation. For instance, Harold Bloom, the well-known American critic, in his book, The Anxiety of Influence, talks about the strong poet, the strong writer. And he says that the strong poets are very much afraid of their great predecessors and they try to avoid their influence. So once again, they try to re-emphasize the importance of the writer. But by and large, the role of the author dwindles, I think, in the 70s and the 80s. The first is the writer then. The next is the text. Now, the text is extremely important. It is a feat of language. It is a linguistic construct. It is multidimensional. And there are different layers of meaning. And the more innovative and challenging the reading is, the greater the meaning accorded to the text. So that the text is something that is ever expanding as a consequence of the efforts of intelligent, challenging critics. Now, Roland Barthes made a very important distinction between the work and the text. The work, he said, was a physical object. Let's say we have Martin Wickramasinghe's Virage. So it's a physical object. It is on your table or it's on your bookshelf. It's a physical object. But the text is not a physical object. It is an abstract concept as a consequence of the newer interpretation. So it's a product of interpretation. So you see how text is regarded so significantly by modern critics like Roland Barthes. So that becomes important. I just want to establish the importance of the text as an artifact. Take a poem from Selani Sandesi. Pahasaraniya minipaminiya kottagata bandakikiniya dadagihiniya viman wata no paraniya vanaramaniya viting vita salalihiniya vandukalaniya puravarata. Now in this poem, you see the rhyming at the beginning, at the end, the parallelisms, and the use of sound to create a very complex texture. So it is a text. After all, text and texture are etymologically cousins because they come from the word text, which is to weave something into meaning. So words like textile and texture are connected. So text becomes extremely important in the hands of critics like Roland Barthes and so on. Now let's take another different example. This is from Sanskrit. Kwashorya Prabhao Vansha Kwachalpa Vishayamati Titishu Dustaram Mohad Dupenas Visagara. Now this is from Raghuvansa. Kwashorya Prabhao Vansha. How great, how illustrious is the lineage of Raghu. Kwachalpa Vishayamati. How insignificant is my mind and imagination. Titishu Dustaram Mohad Dupenas Visagara. This is like trying to cross the mighty ocean on a small raft. Now here you get a contrastive image that's very startling. And that image is a part of the textuality of that stanza. So that I think is something that is important. So you have a poem from Salini Sandesa, you have a poem from Raghuvansa. And let's take this one from English, from the opening lines from the love song of Alfred Prufrock. Let us go then, you and I, where the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon the table. Let us go through half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels. Now in this, the evening spread out like a patient etherized upon the table is a startlingly new image, and that holds the poem together, and that gives it the textual density. So I have just quoted 3 poems from 3 languages that I know. And I want to establish the fact that textuality is very much connected with the craft. And that is a very important thing to keep in mind. So new criticism helped with the establishment of textuality. Russian formalism helped with that. In more recent times, structuralism played a very important role. Structuralism emerged in Paris, largely due to the efforts of linguists and anthropologists like Levi-Strauss, but it quickly became a very important mode of literary analysis, not only in the West, but also in the East. So that structuralism, which is not interested in a writer's vision and values and mode of thinking, but is interested in the way the work has been put to as a unit. The complex unity of the work is what matters. The various elements that interact within it is what matters. So the structuralism, which pays attention to the structure, becomes very important in modern times. And this tended to underline the importance of the text. So structuralism played a very important role. Then comes deconstruction. Deconstruction, as you know, under the leadership of Jacques Derrida, played a very important role in establishing textuality. After all, Derrida once famously said that there's nothing outside of the text. He modified it later. But the text is important because deconstruction is a form of textualism. Everything relates to the text. So deconstruction is a way of reading language. Deconstruction critics, they focus on what is called aporia, which is a Greek word for undesirable, tension. They identify the point of tension or the undesirability in a text, and they try to unravel the whole poem through reading that aporia. So it's a very close reading of the text. Deconstruction is that. To give another example, to give 2 examples, Paul Celan's Derrida reads one of Paul Celan's poems. Paul Celan is a Romanian born writer who is a German language poet. And in one of his poems, there's the word for. Now, Derrida analyzes the whole poem, focusing on this single connectivity, for, F-O-R. And he gives a wonderful sort of interpretation of that, just focusing on the word for. Similarly, his friend, Paul Deman, reads a poem by William Wordsworth, A Slumber Did My Spirit Sleep. And in that poem, he selects a few words, 2 of them are she and now. And he reads a poem in a very complex way, focusing attention on those 2 words. So what I'm trying to establish is, for deconstruction, close attention to words was extremely important, and that becomes a very important aspect. Then we have narratology, the study of narrative. They also focus on the text because point of view, the structuring of the plot, and so on. These demanded close attention to the text. That becomes important, the narratology. The concept of text began to assume greater life and vigor due to the efforts of people like Julia Kristeva. Now, Julia Christopher brings up the notion of intertextuality. Intertextuality means where a text refers to previous text. I mean, let me give you an example. You all have seen Sarachandra's Maname. In Maname, there's a very popular song, written in Malayalam Literature. In that, there's a line, Pipi Tambaran and Hadabambaran, Pia Ravudana, Liya Kindurana. Now, this line is taken from Kavisekre. Now, this is an example of intertextuality. What is interesting is that Sarachandra is able to bring the body of associations related to the Kavisekre to his work. But at the same time, he also imposes his own associations on the Kavisekre, so that when we read Kavisekre, we also keep in mind Sarachandra's attempt. So the intertextuality is a two-way street, and that is something quite important to bear in mind. Then, of course, you have the whole notion of textual context. There's the role of context within the text. That's an interesting problem for literary theories, and modern literary theories have grappled with that. But this is something not new. For instance, in the 5th century textbook, Vakyapadi, which means Vakya, sentence, and other word, there's a sort of attempt. There's an example given called Saindavam Anaya. Saindavam Anaya can mean bring the horse, or it can mean bring the salt, because Saindavam in Sanskrit can mean either horse or salt. So he says, therefore, it's the context that determines meaning. So this is something that, for instance, Wittgenstein talks about meaning as use in context. Or this is something that anthropologists and linguists like Raymond Firth have undermined. So that the idea of text in context and context in text becomes important. Then the whole notion of hypertext. In recent times, scholars have come up with the notion of hypertext, which is, of course, due to digital technology, so that the unified narrative is broken and there's much more complexity introduced into it. Similarly, the word grantha in Sinhala is quite important. The grantha is exactly what text is in English, because the word text in English has two meanings: a text, a written document. Two, it's something woven. In Sinhala, grantha means a text. It's a book or document, but it is also something that is woven, grantha. So both meanings are preserved in the word grantha, and that's quite interesting, actually. So the text then becomes extremely important in our study of literary analysis. The next item is the reader. Now, the reader so far has been neglected. He was in the background. The writer and the text were important, but now the reader becomes important. There are, as a result of the importance of the reader, there emerged a school, very powerful actually, called reader response theory. And the reader response theory was largely a German product centered around the University of Constance. I once had the good fortune of giving a talk at the University of Constance and meeting some of these professors who are associated with this. There are two branches of reader response theory. One is a German branch, and you have people like Wolfgang Iser, Hans Robert Jauns, who are interested more in the phenomenological approach. They draw on phenomenologists like Gadamer and so on. On the other hand, you have the stream that's popular in the United States. People like Norman Holland, Stanley Fish, and so on become important. So that there are two branches. The American branch leans a little more towards psychology, and the German branch leans more towards phenomenology, but both are important. Now, in the German branch, as I mentioned, Gadamer is a very important figure, and he tries to underline the importance of fusion of horizons. That's how literary interpretation takes place. The horizon of the text and the horizon of the reader meet, and there's new generated interpretation. Now, this idea is quite new, but it is not new to us. You take Loada Sangarava, and in the Loada Sangarava, there's a wonderful line called Tama Tama Nana Pama Nin Danagata Yutu. it establishes the cognitive limitations. No one is omniscient, all-knowing. We all have our cognitive limitations. Therefore, interpret, judge on the basis of your cognitive limitation. Is exactly what Gardner would approve of in the 20th century. So that is an interesting idea. And so therefore, we have the reader response theory. Originally, the focus was on the individual reader. But in later times, largely due to the efforts of Stanley Fish, the community became important. So you have what is called the interpretive community. And therefore, the shared codes, shared values, shared understanding becomes much more important. So the reader now becomes very important. And the competence of the reader is given great weight now. Now, the word competence is important. Those of you who do linguistics would know that Chomsky had this bifurcation of competence and performance. The literary theorists use the word in a slightly different way. The competency is the ability to master certain codes and values and so on and interpret the text. Let me give an example. Let me take a poem from the Saldini Sandesi. Perawinda Genagirinda Sidhu Salata, Nagi Pahada, Penasamuda, Satinumuta, Menaulinda, Pahavida, Nindigumita, Sadi Batadaha, Vanduda, Gabimuta. Now, this poem can be read, it can be understood by anyone who speaks Sinhala, but not the full quantum of meaning. But to understand the full plenitude of meaning, you have to know the myth behind it, the myth about the gods churning the ocean of milk. So therefore, competence becomes a part of the reader's ability to judge and interpret. Similarly, you can have competence in various other reading manuals as well. This has given rise to different types of reading. I'll just give two examples. One is called interventionist reading, where you not only read, but you intervene in the message. It is interventionist reading. Or you have what is called symptomatic reading, which is a form of ideological reading. Just like a doctor looks at the symptoms and comes to a conclusion about your disease, the critic observes the symptoms and diagnoses the text. So symptomatic reading is another important. Now, these aspects are quite important, but what is also important to bear in mind is the classical Sanskrit theorists also advanced this notion. For instance, Bhartrhari's Vakyapadiya, which I alluded to earlier, has this notion, central notion, that meaning is created in the mind of the listener. His central question for him was, how does the listener make sense of the stream of sound he hears? So that it's a reader-listener approach that he was advocating. The same thing is found in the famous Rasavada, which is a great contribution to international aesthetics. Rasavada, Bhartamunis, and later developed by Abhinav Gupta and so on in the 9th and 11th centuries. Now, in the Rasavada, there's a famous Rasa Sutra which says, Vibhava Anubhava Vyabhichari Bhava Sanyogat Rasanishpati. That is, Vibhava Anubhava Vyabhichari Bhava. These are the transitory emotions, gives rise to the permanent emotion which is called Sthai Bhava, which is transformed into Rasa. Now, all this happens in the sensibility, in the mind of the listener or the reader or the audience. So it's a listener or the audience's, reader's perspective that becomes important. So therefore, the reader response theory is very important. The attention accorded to the reader becomes important, but it's not a purely a Western product. It is also shared by certain traditional Asian scholars. Now, when I underline the importance of Sanskrit, I am not making a case for cultural essentialism. I'm not saying that what is happening in the West is the same as what happened in the Sanskrit theory. No, but there are significant similarities as well as differences. We need to place the Asian theories in their proper historical, political, cultural context. And that's how we are able to make the best use of it. So that's a reader. And finally, the fourth element is the context. Now, the context was totally ignored until the 20th century. Context. was the background. You had the foreground and you had the background. Marxist critics, to be fair, realized the importance of the context. Like critics like George Lucas talked about the context in interesting ways. The historical, social, political, cultural background played a crucial role in shaping character. So he made it a part of the foreground. Background becomes a part of the foreground for Lucas. Similarly, Frederick Jameson made form a part of reflection of ideology. So these are important steps, but generally this was not paid much attention to. However, in more recent times, the context has become important. There are a number of elements in the context. First, let's take history. History as a subject has undergone great transformation. History is no longer seen as an objective account. It's a narrative. Hayden White and so on have said it is a literary text. And he goes on to analyze in terms of comedy, tragedy, satire, and so on. So that it is a literary text. Then you have the annal school, which takes the total history, long duration into consideration and examines history. Then you have the subaltern history, which had its origin in India, and which looks at history from below, not from top, but from below. Look at the independence movement, not through Nehru's eyes, but eyes of the person. So these are very important movements, and they establish the fact that history is a very powerful factor. It's not just a part of the background, but it's part of the foreground as well. Next, we have culture. Now, culture, as the famous American anthropologist Clifford Geertz said, is historical transmitted symbols embedded in historical transmitted patterns of meaning embedded in symbols. Now, culture is all pervasive. It's very important. It cannot be merely a background factor. It is a part of the foreground as well. So that in more recent times, literary analysis has paid great attention to people like Clifford Geertz, who in turn, of course, drew on literature. So there's a mutuality there that's quite interesting. Then you have ideology. Ideology is no longer the background. It is now the part of the foreground. It determines everything. Ideology was traditionally seen as false values, as Marx said. But in more recent times, due to Louis Althusser and so on, it's seen as imaginary versions of real relations people live. So that it's a way of creating people, good subjects, to be good subjects in capitalist societies. So that ideology, and speaking of ideology, feminism has had a tremendous impact on the growth of literary theory. It's a broad ideology, and it has made a very significant impact on the study and analysis of literature, and that's where literature comes into it. Then you have colonialism, right? Edwin Said has written a book on culture and imperialism, where he points out that imperialism was a crucial force shaping literature in the West. So that colonialism, how it impacts people, society, imagination, becomes a part of the background as well. So that becomes a crucial point that we got to keep in mind. So what we have to then take into consideration is the context. The context is no longer something that is relegated to the background. It's a part of it. The externality has become a very much important part of the internality. So that's what has happened to the context. Now, once again, this is not something confined to the West. For instance, if you take Nagarjuna, I have written extensively about Nagarjuna and Nolamadhyama Karika, and in his work, written in the second century, around the second century, he points out that there's no reality anterior to language. Reality is created by language. Thoughts, images, and so on, ideas are nurtured within textuality. And therefore, relativity becomes important, the theory of relativity. And Nagarjuna emphasizes the importance of language as contributing to reality. So that becomes a crucial aspect. And that's exactly what Derrida is saying. Now, I'm not trying to say what Derrida is saying is calls with Nagarjuna in all respects, in all matters. No, but I'm only saying that both are great demystifiers, and when it comes to religion, reality and language, both share much in common. So that is the fourth aspect, the context. So then once again, to go back, we have the four crucial elements: the writer, you have the text, you have the reader, and you have the context. Their interplay can tell us much for those who are not specialists in literature, whether you are a linguist or whether you are a psychoanalyst or whether you are a geologist. This interplay, which focuses on give and take, mutuality, can be of great interest in understanding what is literature, the literariness. Similarly, this interplay, the challenges and the counter-challenges, can be of great importance to those who are studying modern literary models, theories of literature, like post-structuralism. If to understand writers like Ramsey and so on, it can be very useful to bring in certain notions of traditional Sanskrit aesthetics. So that can be of value to scholars of literature as well. So then my time is almost up. So coming back, I want to once again emphasize the fact that my talk was intended to two audiences, to point out, one, that literature is an important area which we all can participate in and try to understand a little better through the instrumentality of the interplay of writer, text, reader, and context, and also that it can help us furthering our comprehension of literary models. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dissanayake. We are ever so grateful to you for gracing our occasion and delivering the keynote address for this inaugural session. We would have, of course, loved to have you here, but these are bizarre, unforeseen, and strange circumstances. But our gratitude to you is boundless, and thank you once again for taking the time to join and share your expertise, despite the distance and the challenges. And I suppose we should say a note of thanks to the gods of the digital era for not interrupting the service at all. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we have come towards the end of today's program, and my final invitation for the day is to Professor Tilak Hewavasam, the co-coordinator of iPURSE 2021, to propose the vote of thanks.
Good morning, venerable members of Mahasangha, our valued distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the organizing committee of iPURSE 2021. Almost all of you have joined to this inaugural session virtually via an online platform, and thank you very much for your participation. First, I would like to express our deep sense of gratitude to Professor Chandrika Wijayarathne, Vice Chancellor of the University of Colombo, for accepting our invitation to participate in this inaugural session as our chief guest to grace this occasion and for delivering a notable speech. Dear Madam, as a globally recognized researcher, your presence here at this conference as the chief guest is a great honor to our university. I am very grateful to Professor M.D. Lamavansa, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Peradeniya, for providing us an encouraging and visionary speech at this inaugural session. Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to Professor Vimal Dissanayake, who is an internationally recognized innovator, for delivering the keynote speech to the virtual platform. Sir, thank you very much for your rewarding speech, and we are very proud to have you here at iPURSE 2021 as the keynote speaker. My special thanks goes to all other distinguished guests, including the Deputy Vice Chancellor, directors of the postgraduate institutes, and deans of the faculties, librarian, registrar, bursar, and chief medical officer of the university for being present at the inaugural session. As you know, iPURSE was initially planned to be conducted in October 2020 as a physical event. However, we were compelled to postpone the conference several times as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Eventually, the organizing committee decided to conduct this event as a virtual conference while adhering to the health regulations issued for public gatherings. This is the first iPURSE organized by the University of Peradeniya as a virtual event in its history. I am glad to say that more than 800 abstracts were submitted to the conference and nearly 600 papers will be presented. I would like to express our deep sense of gratitude to the former and present Vice Chancellor, former and present Deputy Vice Chancellor, and former and present Dean of the Faculty of Arts for their continuous encouragement and advices in organizing this conference. Thank you very much, sirs. To organize this event, several committees were formed at the university and at faculty levels, and they rendered their utmost support over a year to make this event a success. I should thank to Professor O.G. Dayaratna Banda, Conference Chair, Professor Vasanta Tukorala, Co-Coordinator, members of the Editorial Committee led by Dr. Maduranga Kalugampitiya, members of the Technical Program Committee led by Dr. Fasiya Asmi and Professor Sakuntala Yatigammana, members of the Web Media and Publicity Committee led by Dr. Sudesh Mantilaka, members of the Registration Committee led by Dr. Kumuduni Kumari Hami, members of the Ceremonial Committee led by Dr. Manoj Alawatukotua, members of Funding Committee led by Mr. Shanaka Rodrigo, members of Food and Refreshment Committee led by Mr. Lakshman Kumara, members of Logistic Committee led by Ms. Kumari Herath, and Professor Rohana Seniviratna for handling the iPURSE website professionally. I highly respect Mr. Prabhat Gunatilaka's dedication in customizing and handling the University Conference Management System for iPURSE 2021. Thank you very much for all your commitment and selfless contribution. I really enjoy working with all of you. I would like to thank Dr. Namal Karunaratna and NCSU staff, IT Center staff, audio video team led by Mr. Palitha Handunge, PRO and staff, Chief Medical Officer and staff, Chief Security Officer and staff, Works Department, Landscape Division for their support in organizing this conference. Especially, I would like to thank Ms. Udani Vijayaratna and Ms. Sevandi Hevavasam for their excellent support to organize this conference from the very beginning. I am also very grateful to the eminent scholars who supported in the reviewing process to maintain a high standard during the technical sessions. Contributions from the resource persons to conduct the technical sessions of the conference as session chairs, discussants, and academic coordinators are much appreciated. Your intellectual contribution to stimulate a research culture within the university is much valued. We would like to extend our gratitude to all the representatives of the print and electronic media for the media coverage and to those who provided their technical expertise to hold this virtual event. Last but not least, I am very appreciative of the administrative and non-academic staff of the university, especially at the Faculty of Arts, for carrying the burden of organizing this event, and to numerous others who contributed with their time and labor to make this event a success. Thank you very much for both compeers. I wish you a very productive technical sessions of the iPURSE 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, this brings the official events of the inaugural ceremony of iPURSE 2021 to a close. A few announcements before you leave. The technical sessions will begin promptly at 11 a.m., the links to which can be found on our website, www.pdn.ac.lk/iPURSE/2021. The invited orations of iPURSE 2021 are scheduled as follows. Today's invited oration by Professor Ajanta Dharmasiri of the Postgraduate Institute of Management, Sri Lanka, will begin at 1:30 p.m. Tomorrow's invited oration by Professor Malik Piris of the University of Hong Kong will be at 8 a.m. The links to both can, of course, be found online. Any other queries and questions regarding anything, the organizing committee members are always available for help. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we bring the inaugural ceremony to a close. We wish you all the most productive and most enlightening research sessions ahead. Please remain in the hall while the ceremonial procession leaves. Thank you.